Good morning, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of the How-To Guide for Developing a Publishable Scholarship of Teaching and Learning project. Today I'll be discussing obtaining human subjects approval, collecting your data, and analyzing your data. Again, this video series is part of my HAPS President's Initiative, Expanding Anatomy and Physiology Educational Research in HAPS. So I'd like to thank our sponsors for this President's Initiative, McGraw Hill and Wiley. So today I'll talk a little bit about what exactly human subjects approval means and what the IRB or Institutional Review Board stands for, collecting your data and analyzing your data. So by the end of this video, you should be able to do the following. You should be able to explain why human subjects or IRB approval is needed for an educational research project. You'll be able to compare and contrast exempt, expedited, and full IRB reviews. You'll be able to determine what types of data should be collected to answer your educational research question. And then you'll identify when and how best to analyze the data collected. So let's first talk about human subjects or IRB approval. Keep in mind that human subjects approval for your study needs to be obtained prior to you conducting your research. So prior to you collecting any data whatsoever, you need to have your project approved by an institutional review board. And within the institutional review board, they typically have a human subjects committee. So what exactly is this human subjects or IRB approval? There is a federal policy for the protection of human subjects. It's a very long government document, but in Title 45, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 46, so it's abbreviated 45 CFR 46, any study involving human subjects needs to be reviewed by a Human Subjects Committee through their Institutional Review Board, abbreviated IRB. The screen capture I have on the right shows that Code of Regulations, Title 45, Part 46. So if you want to look at that in detail, you've got that link there on the Department of Health and Human Services website. Essentially what it says is that if you're going to use humans in any kind of research, including educational research, you need to run your study by a Human Subjects Committee to ensure that the subjects are not being coerced into participating in the study that you are suggesting. So educational research needs IRB review because your students are human subjects. And as such, they are afforded the rights and protections by 45 CFR 46. So what exactly is an institutional review board? An institutional review board, abbreviated IRB, is the board that is responsible for protecting the rights and welfare of human subjects recruited to participate in research activities. These research activities can be participating in a clinical trial, looking at a variety of psychological tests. They also include students involved in educational research. Now, where an institutional review board is located can vary from institution to institution. Some places may have their IRB located in a vice provost's office. Some may have it located within the dean of faculty's office, or if you have your own separate Office of Research Compliance or a sponsored research program site, it may be located there. So at the Indiana University website, you'll see that our Human Subjects Committee is located in the Office of Research Compliance. So keep in mind where exactly this office is located may vary, but the Institutional Review Board, of which Human Subjects is a part of, typically is located on most U.S. institutions. Keep in mind that not all institutional review boards are alike, that while there are general regulations for all institutional review boards, there may be some sub-regulations that are specific to the institution. So, for example, at Indiana University, since we are a Research One institution, we tend to view and regard human subjects approval along a very strict, rigorous protocol. That may not necessarily be the same protocol that is used at some other institutions. The same basic guidelines still hold true, but how strictly some of those guidelines are held may vary from institution to institution. Keep in mind, too, that not all institutions may have their own specific IRB. So, for example, many community colleges may be under the auspice of a single institutional review board. Again, if you're teaching at a community college and you're not sure, contact your dean's office, ask them about the IRB, and they may be able to say that they don't have an IRB on campus, but there is an overall IRB that is looking over multiple institutions in the same general geographic area. Also note that I've been emphasizing United States institutions. The 45 CFR 46 code is a United States regulation that doesn't necessarily apply to other places. So some Canadian schools typically do not have an institutional review board. They may or may not. I would double check at your institution just to be on the safe side. So again, check with your institution about the specific guidelines and regulations. So what I'm giving you here is based on my experiences at Indiana University and a Research One institution. Some of the nuances or subtleties may vary at your institution. This image here is taken from the Indiana University Office of Research Compliance. What this shows is that if you're doing research, which is defined as systematic investigation and designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge, as well as utilizing human subjects, that falls under the auspices of an institutional review board review. So there are basically three types of human subjects reviews: exempt, expedited, and full. An exempt human subjects review means that the research is considered exempt from a full committee review. It's still evaluated by someone in the institutional review board, but it may not necessarily have to go to a full committee. Second level is expedited. So what that means is that there may be minimal risk to participants, but there may be a few other things that involve more than one individual at the institutional review board looking at it, and they may require some additional stipulations for your study. Full review is where there is a full committee reviewing the project, and it's typically done if there is a greater than minimal risk or if other criteria are met. So a classic example of something that would have to undergo a full human subjects review is if you were doing a clinical medical trial on a variety of subjects. That would undergo a full medical review. Luckily for us, most educational research falls under either the exempt or the expedited category. Keep in mind that regardless of what category you think your study falls under, you have to submit paperwork for any of these types of reviews. So if you're not sure which category your study falls under, I would recommend that you contact your institutional review board and discuss it with them. Tell them what you're planning on doing and tell them, well, here's the data I'm planning to collect, here's what I plan to review. They will offer you suggestions and guidance prior to you submitting your documentation and will help smooth out the process and make it a lot easier for you. They're very friendly people and they will be more than willing to help you, so call them and ask them for advice. Also talk to your colleagues who also may be doing educational research. They can offer you some tips and guidelines as well prior to you submitting the documentation. Now at Indiana University, they have a protocol decision tree. So if you want to see basically where you think your study may fall under, I recommend that you use this URL and click on it to begin. So let me just show you how this works. This brings up their protocol decision tree. Again, keep in mind that this is based on Indiana University studies. But if I click on here to begin, they'll say, in the course of your research, will you interact with, intervene, or obtain or access private, identifiable information or data about a living individual? We're planning on collecting data about our students, so item A would apply to any educational research. So if we click on A, it will then ask you, well, under what category does your research procedures involve? You'll want to choose the category that you think best elaborates what you think your research falls under. So normal educational practices in an established or commonly accepted educational setting would apply for most educational research where you're looking at a teaching intervention in the class. So let me click on A here, and you'll see that they say that it appears that your study would be exempt, but you'll still need to fill out the paperwork, and they can't promise you it would be exempt. But at least this way, I now have a better idea of, yes, I likely will have to fill out exempt paperwork as opposed to expedited paperwork. Some individuals have misconceptions about human subjects approval in educational research, so let's do a little bit of a check on the knowledge that you've obtained to date. So true or false? All educational research is considered exempt research. If you answered false, you would be correct. Now, while most educational research is exempt, not all of it is. It may not be considered exempt, and it may fall under the expedited category if your subjects are children. And children are defined as individuals younger than 18. So if you are teaching freshmen who may be age 17, some institutional review boards may say, no, we don't think that that exactly qualifies as a child, that you don't necessarily have to view things as stringently as you would if you were evaluating a 5-year-old. Others may. If you are recording the data in a way where the human subjects can be identified, and if this data were released, it would place the subjects at risk of liability or standing, then your project may fall under the expedited category. So let's say you were teaching a very small class and you were collecting sensitive information about the students as well, about the study, then they may require an expedited review, and that just simply means that you have to fill out a slightly more paperwork and you need to take a few more extra steps to ensure that the subject's risk of standing is not affected in your particular study. Second true or false question. If I think my research falls under the exempt guidelines, I do not have to contact my IRB. Again, if you listed false, you would be correct. IRB is responsible for making the final decision about your study. You may think it falls under the exempt category, but you are not the expert. Your human subjects and IRB committees are the final sayers of whether it falls under exempt. And even if it is exempt, you still need to fill out the paperwork regardless of the study. Third true or false question. I don't have to notify my students that I'm conducting educational research in the classroom. This also is false. Now, in terms of notification, the type of notification you do can vary. At Indiana University, they recommend that we inform our students with either a study information sheet or an informed consent statement. So what's the differences between the two? The study information sheet would be simply you'd pass out a sheet of paper letting the students know you're collecting data about the regular classroom activities. You don't necessarily need to get signed consent statements from your students. You're merely letting them know you're evaluating a teaching intervention so that they are aware that the study's going on. If you are doing a study where you may be collecting some data that requires written consent of your students, that's where an informed consent statement will come into play. So again, depending upon your IRB, you may need to fill out a study information sheet or an informed consent statement. There may be some institutions that say you don't even have to bother with the study information sheet as long as you tell your students verbally. But again, it's based on what your IRB tells you. So talk to your IRB about what kind of notification you need to give your students. So take a few minutes to pause and reflect. I would pause this video right now and then review the educational research questions you developed in parts 1 through 3 of this video. Do you think your study would fall under an exempt, an expedited, or a full review? If you still have questions about the Institutional Review Board and human subjects process, I recommend that you go to the Indiana University site through the Office of Research Compliance. It has some basic steps about how you would decide about what level of review you would need to do, how to get started, where to submit. Again, keep in mind that that is specific to Indiana University, but that at least lets you know here's one way that one institution oversees human subjects protection. The other place I recommend you take a look at is at the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Human Research Protections. They have some basic information about what's involved, about protecting human subjects, and how different institutions may meet these criteria. So you've obtained your human subjects approval, you're all set and ready to go. The next step is to perform your research and collect your data. So when you perform your classroom research, make sure you review part 3 of the video series about determining the appropriate methods of assessment. So ideally, you've developed your methods of assessment after reviewing part 3 of the video. You're now in the semester of the class of the year that you're doing your teaching intervention, and you are in the midst of collecting your data. You've determined, after reviewing part 3 of the video series, what constitutes data for your research question. Keep in mind that as you're collecting data, you may determine that additional data may need to be collected or a different type of data may need to be collected. Be prepared to modify your assessment methods as the semester progresses. But one caveat, if you need to collect significantly different data than what you've listed in your IRB paperwork, you will need to contact your IRB and then see if you need to submit an amendment to say, oh yes, I'd also like to collect this data as well. I would contact your instructional consultants at your local Center for Teaching and Learning too for advice about how to collect the data. They may be able to assist you in collecting the data, and they may have some other tips and suggestions as you're in the process of collecting your data. So pause and reflect right now. When do you think you'd like to begin your study? When do you want to look at those specific research questions? Circle a date on your timeline, and that way you can count backwards to determine when you need to submit your IRB approval, when you need to develop your methods of assessment, and then you've got something on the calendar so you can begin your study with a specific date in mind. Once you've collected your data, you then next need to analyze your data. Now, I'm not going to be talking about specific statistical tests and what's all involved in them. That is beyond the scope of this particular video. But I just want to talk broadly about what it means to analyze your data and when you should do it. So ideally, you should not analyze your data until after your class ends and final grades have been assigned. That way, your students know that their grade was not dependent upon whether or not they participated in the educational research assignment. And your IRB will be a lot happier with you if you wait until after final grades have been assigned, so that way students have not felt that they've been coerced into doing your educational research project. The analysis of your data will depend upon what methods of assessment you've chosen. Different analysis procedures will be involved with different types of assessments, via qualitative or quantitative. So let's compare and contrast some ways that you would analyze quantitative data versus qualitative data. And keep in mind, these are not the only ways of analyzing the data, but this is just giving you a basic overview. So quantitative data could be things like looking at grades on homework assignments, final grades. Maybe you want to compare beginning of the semester exams versus the end of the semester exams. So if you're simply looking at exam scores or final grades, you may want to look at means and frequencies and simply see, did the averages on these exams go up? You may want to do a slightly more detailed analysis. Maybe you wanted to do a statistical analysis like a t-test to compare the first exam versus the last exam and to see if there are significant differences. If you have more than one value that you want to look at, let's say you want to look at 4 different exams over the semester, that's when an analysis of variance or ANOVA would come into play because you'd be looking at 4 different exams. If you want to have more information about different statistical tests, I recommend that you do some research online about statistical analysis. Also keep in mind that in HAPS Institute, that is the professional development component, the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society. We are constantly developing new courses, and graduate level statistics courses will be available in the near future, so you can get a better understanding of some of these statistical tests. What about the qualitative data though? Maybe you've had students fill out various responses, or you've had them fill out journal entries, or you're looking at comments on course evaluations. How do you analyze those beyond, hey, my students seem to like this topic? Well, you can read through all the responses. This is an iterative process. You do this multiple times. See if you can establish categories from the responses. Maybe they have categories about a particular teaching intervention you did that said they became more aware of what they knew. That would be a category. Or they were really excited about the topic. So then another category would be students commented they were more enthusiastic about learning. So you read through those things multiple times. You will see if you can develop categories where everyone's response could be fit into a particular category. And then those categories can help you develop a big picture as to what the qualitative responses were from your students. So this is one way that you could look at qualitative data. Coming up in the next video, now that you've analyzed your data, we'll talk about presenting your educational research and publishing your educational research. It's through presenting and publishing your educational research that you will be able to contribute to the body of knowledge about teaching and learning, and your institution will recognize your efforts. So see you next time.